What's happening? It's Brian Fair from Shadows Fall, and you're listening to the Thunder Underground.
Welcome to episode 418 of the Thunder Underground podcast. Trent here as always, and I'm excited about this week because Brian Fair is back on the podcast. This is not an April Fool's joke, my friend. If you're listening to this the day it came out, it's April 1st. But if you're listening to this 9 months from now, I realize that dorky joke is completely irrelevant. But what is relevant is Brian Fair is here to talk about Shadows Fall, new single, In the Gray, and new music they're working on, some memories of old stuff, and all kinds of great things. I'm going to talk a little more about Shadows Fall, and we're going to jump into this interview with Brian. But before we do, I need to let you know who sponsors this podcast, and that would be Sunset Tattoo. Sunset Tattoo is a tattoo shop located in Midtown Tulsa. Their tattoos are done good and proper. They're state licensed. They're Native American owned, and they have a female artist on staff full-time. Hey, with all those things I just said right there, what's stopping you? You should jump on their socials, Facebook, Instagram, or both Sunset Tattoo Tulsa. There's tons of photos on there, so you can check out the work throughout the years. Well over 25 years of experience from Jake and his crew over there. I've had work done by Jake multiple times. I'm very happy with it. Gonna have more done in the future. I know many other people that have had work at Sunset Tattoo that are very happy with it as well. And I know that you would be if you do as well. So follow them on their socials so you don't miss any of their specials that go on. Don't miss any of their photos. Like I said, if you hit them up to set up an appointment, you can get in there to talk about what work you're looking to have done. They accept walk-ins as well. So hit up Sunset Tattoo and tell them you heard about them right here on Thunder Underground. DEB Concerts is a concert promoter based out of the Tulsa area that's brought lots of great acts to downtown Tulsa at the club level and also at the BOK arena level. They also book the DEB concert stage at Rocklahoma every year, and this year is no exception. This year will feature sets on the DEB concert stage from Orianthi, amazing guitarist. I'm super excited to be able to see her live finally. Mike Tramp, the vocalist of White Lion. He's been on this podcast just last summer. Check that out if you have not. Dime Store Riot, members of that band have been on this podcast multiple times. Fist of Rage, members of that band have been on here multiple times. Van Halen, a great Van Halen tribute. One Night Stand, a great band out of the Tulsa area, like a party rock band. So many other great bands to check out. That stage also features the pre-party. If you have the 3-day ticket, at any level of that ticket, you can go to the pre-party, which happens Thursday on the DEB concert stage. That will be headlined by Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. He's also been on this podcast. That was a great one. I'm absolutely happy with that episode, and I'm also happy to see Dee Snider live. I've seen Twisted Sister many times throughout the years, but never got to see Dee live. His solo work is heavy as hell. Great metal stuff. You got to check this out. That day will also feature Trixter. Two of the members of Trixter have been on this podcast in the past, and that day will also feature another act from the 80s that's a pretty well-known legendary name that will fit right between Trixter and Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. So be on the lookout for that announcement when it finally happens. And yeah, hit up DEB Concerts on their socials. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are all at DEB Concerts. Give them a follow. I also keep you up to date on any news right here as well. And of course, let DEB Concerts know you heard about them right here. Finally, we've got Rocklahoma Bitches. They've been an institution at Rocklahoma since 2011. If you've been out to Rocklahoma and you've been in the campgrounds, or you've been in the VIP sections, or you've been at that DEB concert stage I was just talking about, you've surely seen Rocklahoma Bitches. Kendra and Christy are very charitable people. They're always giving out their merch. They've got tons of merch. T-shirts, koozies, necklaces, bags, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. They've got new stuff every year, guitar picks. Doesn't matter what it is, they'll give it to you for free. They never charge for anything, and they've got tons of stuff with them, always at all times. Not at all times. I did not mean to say that, so don't walk up to one of them and demand something. Don't be an asshole. But they'll give you merch because they're nice people. They also support nonprofit organizations, one of those being at Rocklahoma. Every year, Christy of Rocklahoma Bitches bids on the autographed guitars that Rocklahoma puts up for bid every year, and she generally always wins one of them from my memory, if that serves correct. They also support other nonprofit organizations, and they sponsor the Cancer Sucks benefit that happens every year in Tulsa in late November, early December. So hit up Rocklahoma Bitches on Facebook. Follow them. Follow the page Rock Bitch. That's all one word. And then join the group Rocklahoma Bitches, all in caps with exclamation points. It's just a fun group to join, even if you're not going to Rocklahoma. I know a lot of people who listen to this that are not from, the Tulsa area. The majority of people that listen to this are not from the Tulsa area, and all my sponsors are kind of from this area. But there's also reason for you to check this stuff out if you're not from this area, because even if you don't travel into Rocklahoma, if you're a festival goer, you're a fan of rock music, the Rocklahoma Bitches group is great for all that stuff. So be sure to follow, and of course mention Thunder Underground when you do it. Okay, Brian Fair, like I mentioned up front, has been on this podcast before, and something kind of fun, to me at least, probably only to me, that I realized before I did the interview, because I looked up to see when it happened, and I mentioned that at the beginning of the interview. The interesting note is that this previous interview, episode 265, Jason was still doing the podcast with me then, so he's a part of that one. That episode came out in May of 2020, so right when the pandemic was in full swing. This podcast started in May of 2015, so Brian Fair came in right at the 5-year mark. And here we are now at the beginning of April of 2025, so we're just about a month and a half shy of the 10-year mark. So he almost made that kind of anniversary, 5-year anniversary thing, but we'll just act like in the future that he's hit every 5-year anniversary. So in 2030, he'll definitely have to be back on in the spring of 2030. But I would like to think that it would happen much sooner than that as well. So maybe by 2030, we'll say instead of the 3rd time, that'll be the 5th time. How about that? We'll put that into the universe to kind of make that happen. Brian Fair, of course, lead vocalist of Shadows Fall. He was the lead vocalist of Overcast. Prior to that, Downpour, Hell Night. These are all bands that he's been a part of throughout the years. As he mentions in this episode, Hell Night is still active on occasion. And of course, Shadows Fall is back active now as well. Last time I spoke to Brian, I'm sure like every interview he did was, hey, you think we'll ever see Shadows Fall live again? And here we are 5 years later, and guess what? It happened. We saw them again. They've been out playing shows now for going on close to 3 years now, I guess, because it was sometime, I believe, in 2022. So probably 2.5 years. Because I saw them at Blue Ridge Rock Fest in 2022. Of course, Blue Ridge Rock Fest is well known for the issues it had in 2023. They had issues in 2022 as well. In 23, it was very notorious. That's not even something I'm going to go into right now. But the year before in 22 had some issues, but not as drastic. And the point is, Shadows Fall played their show, and I was fortunate enough to be able to watch that. Not only watch it from side stage, so I didn't get the full experience of hearing the power of Shadows Fall, because if you've never stood side stage at some shows, it's very inaudible, or just depending on where you're standing, you're only hearing drums, or you're not hearing vocals, or you're only hearing vocals, whatever. The point of all that being is I got to see them up close, super excited that they were back, and just like everybody else, hoping maybe this will lead to new music. All these guys kind of branched off into different areas, but Shadows Fall was what they were all most well known for. So we were all hoping that they would come back into that entity, and they finally did. They started performing these live shows. They released In the Gray back in December of 2024. There's a video out for it as well, something else me and Brian talk about. Great song that fits right into what we expect from Shadows Fall. That great kind of hybrid sound that came out in the whole new wave of American heavy metal that was kind of headlined by Lamb of God and Killswitch Engage are the bands that got the biggest. And then we had like God Forbid, Unearth, and Shadows Fall, and some other bands that came out, all from that New England area, Northeast American rock and roll heavy metal. Shadows Fall was right at the heart of it, and I mention that because of all those bands, they're the one that I latched on to the most. Just absolutely love the fact that they incorporated thrash into their music a bit more than those other bands, and that was kind of what set them apart. Same thing that they do in this new song. It's thrashy as hell. So if you're a fan of thrash and you have never really listened to Shadows Fall and you're listening to this episode, first off, I thank you for listening to me ramble about a band that you've never listened to. So kudos to you. But I'm assuming you're a fan of Shadows Fall since you're listening, so you probably don't need me to explain everything that I'm saying. I've seen this band live throughout the years several times, one of which was at a show in Oklahoma City, I would say about 15 years ago now. I was reminded of this because before I recorded this interview with Brian, I listened back to the interview that Jason and I did in 2020. And I had mentioned this to him, so I just popped in my head again right now, but I had, went up and spoke to Brian. Meet him, like I said, big fan of Shadows Fall since they kind of hit the scene in the early 2000s. And this was I believe, on the Retribution tour. I was wearing a Corrosion of Conformity t-shirt from the Deliverance tour in 95. And it wasn't a typical metal shirt because it was like an army green color. And it had like the, if you're familiar with the COC design of that era with like the nuclear bomb, kind of atomic bomb cloud with Deliverance written through it. And then on the back, it had like this circular kind of trippy design with tour dates and everything. Brian asked me if I don't even remember and I wish I remembered what shirt he was wearing, which would make the story a little more interesting maybe. But he asked me if I would trade that COC shirt for whatever shirt he was wearing at the time. And I said no, because that was a special shirt to me. And I fucking love Corrosion Conformity. Pepper Keenan is one of my all-time favorite musicians. But the point of that being is Brian's got good taste in music and t-shirts, I guess. Just a random story to throw out there to you. Another side note in the world of Shadows Fall, if you haven't seen or heard in the past month or so, Chris Beatty, actually it's probably been 2 months ago by now, was announced that he was out of Hatebreed. And that came as a big shock because, he's primary songwriter along with Josta. He's kind of like the glue that holds that band together, I would think, at least in the studio sense. The way that they all kind of, spoke about it, in interviews. I've had everybody in Hatebreed on except him and Jamie, the other three members, and they all spoke about that in the sense of those were the two that kind of wrote the music and called the shots in the live show. So I would think it would be a big loss in the world of Hatebreed. You would think. I'm a big fan. But the person they got to step in and fill a spot is Matt Blanchard from Shadows Fall. So as a huge fan of Shadows Fall, I'm pretty happy with that. That's a good opportunity for Matt, and that's also a good name to plug into Hatebreed, in my opinion. So I just wanted to throw that in there if that's some news you missed. All right, let's quit rambling. Let's jump into this interview. Here is Brian Fair of Shadows Fall. I just looked up to see when it was. I knew it was like during the pandemic, but the last time I talked to you was actually like May 2020 during the heart of the pandemic. So quite a bit has changed since then. We were talking about maybe Shadows Fall will do some stuff,
Yeah, it's crazy how long ago that was now too, man. It's that like time warps just jumped. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Jumped here to the point to where you've actually got a single out in the gray, it's been out now, 3 months? I mean, what's the reception been like from everybody?
Yeah, man, we're just so happy to finally release new music. Like we're working on a full album's worth of material, but I feel like it's gonna drop kind of in chunks and then hopefully the rest of it all at once kind of thing. We just couldn't like sit on it anyway, like
Yeah.
we were just so excited with how that tune came out. And it's kind of a different world now too, where you can release like singles leading up to just, more songs and keeping people interested. So Yeah, man, we were stoked with how it came out and just, wanted to get it out in front of people. Been super psyched to just be writing again with the guys because we didn't know if that was going to be kind of part of the deal when we started playing shows again. And the writing has really become the main focus for like the last, year and a half or so, which has been awesome again to kind of get back in that mode. So it's killer.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered my next question, which was, I mean, when you guys were releasing this, did it have a bit more of an excitement for you than a normal single would have because it had been, what, 12 years since the last?
Totally,
Yeah.
12 years or something, over
Yeah.
a decade, So yeah, no, it was definitely super exciting, and just we when we first started kind of writing music, we wanted to make sure it was going to be like Shadows Fall music. We hadn't worked on new material in such a long time, and once we started writing, things just clicked right out of the gates. And In the Gray was one of those songs that kind of came together pretty quickly too. And we wanted to kind of have the first song a pretty energetic, like just come out swinging thrash metal style. It's got a big melodic chorus, but the rest of it is pretty much just pedal to the metal thrash. So that was also, why mess around? Like, just
Right.
come out with the first one swinging. So we were super stoked. So yeah, everything about it was just kind of an exciting new chapter.
Well, I just saw the video, you guys posted on the socials about the making of the music video for In the Gray.
Yeah.
It didn't have, it didn't have any behind the scenes clips of your part of it, but what was that process like for you? Were you like in the water a ton or were you in and out a lot
Yeah.
or?
Man, it was sort of my own fault too, because it was a long, wet filming set, like session. But I when I talked to the director, Chris, who's amazing, I was kind of like, this song has a feeling of just like heavy water and like, being, trying to fight against that sort of weight. And he's like, well, all right, we're sticking you in a pool for like the next, however many hours. So at the rain room, we got like the footage of me like with there, and that place was cool. And that was basically just a ring of like fairly decently warm water. The pool we rented was freezing cold, like, and we had to cover all the like tile and all that, so it didn't look like just some like pool. Luckily, there was like Airbnbs for pool. We just found like an indoor one, and just me and Chris and his girl who's assisting him just pretty much hung out in that water for like a good 4 or 5 hours, probably. So, and you're in your clothes, so it's like soaking wet, super heavy.
Yeah.
But it was worth it. It came out sick. So, and then he's the one who actually himself did. He was the one under all the goop. Uh, he gets a lot of ideas, and then when he looks for volunteers, he's like, no one wants to do that, so he's got to do it himself.
Right. When you
Yeah.
look at that process as a whole, like what's changed throughout the years? Because I mean, we're say a video like Destroyer of Senses 20, what, 22, 3 years ago now.
Yeah,
Like what's
back then though,
changed
the
in
whole
technology to now?
though the technology's changed a ton, where everything's a lot smaller. You can do a lot with less, which is cool. As far as well, because the budgets are a lot smaller than they used to be back then. We shot when we first were filming videos with like in the Century Media days. At very first, there wasn't much of an outlet, but then Headbangers Ball 2 came on MTV2, and then there was Uranium on Fuse. So you had like a outlet for your videos that was like more worth the label putting a budget into it.
Yeah.
And but luckily now that the budgets are smaller, the technology's made it so where you can do so much more on a smaller budget to still make it look, as big as those videos did and as pro as they did. So it's cool, yeah. But for us, like, yeah, we hadn't filmed a video in probably 14 years or so. So you forget how long those days are.
Yeah.
And you're hearing that song over and over and over again. So you better love it.
Yeah. You ever sat in there and you hear something that just hits you all of a sudden after hearing it for 5 hours, thinking, "Man, I should have done that slightly different."
Oh, I hear that. I hear that right when I listen back to it. Once we approve a mix, the next time I hear it, I'm like, oh man, I would have done this, I would have done that. But that's
Right.
the beauty of a record is it's a document of a space and time. So you can't really go back and change it too much. That's that you can get lost in the sauce with that stuff. Where you want to change everything, and that's especially now the technology you can mix and match like such craziness within the in the box sort of effects and mixing tools that you can really go, like never stop tweaking. So yeah, at
Yeah.
some point you got to just, you got to be happy with what there is. And it's funny with this recording process with Zeus this time around, we've done it pretty stripped down as far as we're not reamping like guitar tracks a ton. It's like basically their live setups and just sick mics, sick preamps, so everything just sounds huge. but like not really, before we would experiment with reamping a million different things and combining tones and all this. This one we kind of wanted to, make something that didn't sound maybe as surgical and clinical as some, metalcore or modern metal's kind of gotten. We wanted to bring a little bit of thrash energy to it and a little more of a raw, not necessarily sonically raw, but just a little more like live-ish approach to it. So.
Well, I mean, you mentioned, I mean, working with Zeus and like this new music. Are you guys associated with a label now, or?
Yeah, we're working with Heavy Monarch.
Okay.
They it's a killer lineup too, man. When we talked to a few labels, but very few, because we kind of had an idea of what we wanted to do, and kind of the type of deal we were looking for. So we hit it right off the bat with them. They have a great roster with everyone from like Zach Wild and Ace Frehley, but then also like Darkest Hour and Escuela Grind, and then High on Fire, Crowbar. It's just so many killer bands. So it really made sense, and they're kind of also approaching it more as we're signing for a group of songs where we can sort of release things slowly and then put it all together. Because just the way we work as a band right now, since it's not everyone's full-time life, we want to do like it's not necessarily take our time, but we want to make sure we maximize like our time when we can get it, because it's so hard to get everyone together. So they were really willing to kind of work with us on that level of like realizing where the band is at this point in our life. So that was a big part of it. So, and they've been killer so far.
So does that, I mean, when you look back, at like the early days, does it give you like this kind of freedom to know that the label's not giving you input kind of, it's more of just like a do this at your pace, I would assume?
Yeah, and it's more just the break from the album cycle sort of thing that,
Yeah.
when we first were around, you basically put out a record every year and a half or so, and then you toured nonstop, like, and that was kind of how it worked. And now there's so many different outlets. There's so many different ways to get your music to people. It's not as traditional record label relationship kind of setup. So, which is cool. And you have to kind of have a modern approach. And for a band like us, we're kind of come from an old school like approach. So it's good to have a label that has that forward thinking and kind of knows how to navigate the kind of new way of the music biz. So.
And, releasing singles and going hopefully eventually an album, like, are you setting on songs right now, or was that In the
Yeah,
Gray
we
the
we
only song that
basically
was completed completely, or?
no, we have a couple that were totally done that may need some like mix notes, but are
Okay.
are, are tracked. And then we have the instrumentals tracked for a lot. I got to go, and we're starting to work on vocal demos right now. Got kind of trading things back and forth. And we've got the skeleton to another group of new songs that we haven't tracked instrumentally. So all said and done, we're going to kind of keep just writing and recording, kind of as things come along. But we have a good foundation of, I'd say, 6 or 7 songs that are pretty much there and tracked like instrumentally, and the vocal ideas are at least in a skeleton form. It's a matter of getting in and getting time to record them. And then, but then, like I said, there's a whole other group of songs right behind it that we got to start working on too. So,
Okay.
yep.
Um,
Yeah. Busy, busy.
yeah. During the, your guys' hiatus, it's kind of became a known thing that the Shadows Fall became kind of like a breeding ground for other bands, between
Yeah.
Overkill and Anthrax and Flotsam and Jetsam and now Hatebreed. Of course, you worked with Hell Night and Downpour, but did any like established band ever approach you during that period about joining them?
Definitely not on the level of the big four like John, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
right.
But hey, if anyone needs to fill in, let me know. Uh, I got approached about a few musical projects, but a lot of times what it came down to at that time, I wasn't ready to go tour and like kind of start a band that wanted to kind of go all in. So, there's a few musicians who kind of tossed around some ideas, but nothing that ever really got solid, but not like already established bands. Um, but at that time, like, I was just, if I was going to do anything, it was going to be more local or sort of just studio-ish stuff, unless Shadows Fall was going to get back together, because the energy to break a new band is it takes a lot, and I
Yeah.
just didn't have that time between family and just honestly desire or energy to do. Uh, but yeah, I never rule anything out. I'm always down to like listen to stuff. But yeah, it's funny how the Shads became the like bench for like a bunch of thrash metal bands. Like
Yeah.
if you needed someone to come in, like those dudes were ready. I mean, that shows you the skill level. I was lucky enough to kind of come up in a band with these guys who are just incredible players that these like legacy legendary bands wanted them playing with them. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And everyone's been making new music as well. With Jason with Category 7, and then John and Matt with Living Wreckage. And, like you mentioned, I've done a few things with Hell Night around St. Louis, and then also Downpour with some of the friends from back in Massachusetts. So there's always music being made between all of us, but it shows you that, the level those dudes get when you get the call,
Yeah.
to some of those bands. It's pretty cool. So,
Yeah. You mentioned Shadows Fall is not like a full-time operation like it used to be, but is it kind of like your full-time focus in music? Or are you going to do anything else with Hell Night, or is that still an ongoing thing?
Hell Night, we kind of do when the time is right and everyone gets together for a show. Like it's usually we're now down to just maybe a couple times a year.
Okay.
We were practicing like regularly and playing like locally a decent amount. But yeah, between families and work and everything, and we just kind of now pick and choose like what sounds like a fun night. Um, and Downpour was always more going to be a studio thing. So we played a few shows in the early days, but I don't think that'll really happen much. That would be cool, but that would take a lot. So yeah, I stay busy making some. Right now, it's really about writing Shadows Fall stuff, and then the few shows that we have lined up this year. We're playing more than we have since we got back. Between the run with Kill Switch, and we did some anniversary shows in the winter, and some festivals coming up. So it's a blast to kind of get out there and play a little more regularly. So I don't think we'll ever go full time touring again. Uh, like year long kind of tour cycles, unless something incredible came up. But you saw, never say never. But right now we're just looking to kind of like a perfect thing for us is doing like a week and a half, 2 weeks with Kill Switch is like perfect. So
Yeah.
that type of touring, like John can get the time off between Anthrax stuff to do something about that length, and say, I can take off some work, and everyone can rearrange a little bit. But to try and do like an 8 week tour would be real difficult at this point. So
Well, you mentioned doing some of these festivals. Are any of the festivals ones that Shadows Fall has never played before, like Sonic Temple
yeah,
or
most of these, yeah, like
yeah,
we weren't around
right.
playing when the Danny kind of Wimmer festivals and these U.S. festivals came back. So right when we came back, we got to play Incarceration. We got to play the Welcome to Rockville, uh, Aftershock, Blue Ridge before that stopped. And those are for us. Furnace Fest was amazing, and for us to get to play those big festivals in the U.S., that was something that only really happened in Europe, outside of like an Ozfest thing or something like that over here. So we're psyched. So Sonic Temple is going to be incredible. The lineup in general is amazing, but our stage is like a little bit of a time warp where it's Kill Switch, Shadows Fall, All the Remains, Bleeding Through. It's just like, what year is it? Like it's crazy. So stoked. So that should be fun, and then that leads right into the Kill Switch tour. So it's
Okay.
perfect.
Talked about that a lot, but over the last few years, it's just great to see because even when the rock festivals became a big thing, it was still the bands like Disturbed or whoever was getting radio play. But over the past few years, kind of the Danny Wimmer pushed it towards the heavier side. Every one of these lineups has bands like
For
Shadows Fall
sure.
or Darkest Hour or whatever, which is amazing to see. Yeah.
Yeah, there's at least the stages that are all that, or like at least mostly that, and it's a good mix too, and it kind of it's fun to kind of have that camaraderie backstage the way you felt like when you were at those European festivals, but they're also run infrastructure wise super well, and like for the audiences, it's always amazing. So it's just great that that came to the U.S. and he was able to build kind of the infrastructure to do that every year and give heavy bands a shot on it as well. You
Yeah.
always got to have your big headliners, like obviously, like, but it's also cool that he's going a little more traditional metal with that stuff, with like Maiden doing like, Aftershock, and you got Metallica doing Sonic Temple and things like that. So it's cool, man. And not having to take all the expenses to travel to Europe to do the festivals is huge too, because that used to be the only way to kind of play in front of that many people in the metal world at one time. So it's cool.
Especially like at these festivals or even maybe social media. Now that Shadows Fall is like 20, 25 years into your existence, do you have band members of new bands coming up to you and citing you as an influence or?
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, you get to like like we realized like, man, our first record came out 26 years ago. So like, yeah, some of these kids who are in their 20s, who are playing like the festivals, yeah, they like caught that at the end of it too. So it's pretty cool to see kind of that legacy, but also a lot of the bands are still out there that we came up with still playing. You've got
Yeah.
Lamb of God and Kill Switch and Hatebreed and Darkest Hour and Unearth. all these bands are out there still killing and bleeding through. It's awesome. But to see the younger bands that were influenced by that stuff at a time where there hadn't been before that maybe as much exposure to like U.S. metal until like that second wave that kind of happened in the early 2000s. It's cool to see what that's branched off into in so many different directions. So definitely cool.
Do you
But it makes
notice?
you feel old too.
Yeah, right. Do you notice like fan wise as far as like a younger audience? Because I mean, you guys, had that period where you're away, so a lot of people, if they weren't looking into the past, might not know Shadows Fall if they're a younger kid. But now that you've kind of got a little resurgence going,
Yeah, for sure. I think when we first came back, like our first shows were definitely, old fans who were just excited that we were playing again. And maybe some of their kids too, which is another crazy part of like being a band for this long, is you see that turnover. But now, yeah, since we've started playing out again, just being a little more active, our stuff being on Sirius, XM and getting the video out and all that, has definitely probably kids who are into that type of music, who may have heard our name but didn't, weren't as familiar, hopefully got a chance to check it out. So yeah, but it's cool. It's we also know we've always been a band that whenever we play a festival, like we always come out there as if like no one knows who we are, but we're there just to punch you in the mouth. Like we just roll out there like ready to just like bring it. So it doesn't matter who's there. Then the beauty of those rock festivals is you're exposed to a lot of new people, but also they're there to just like rock. Like so those audiences are just like, man, that's heavy. It's fast. We're into it. Let's do this. Like even if they aren't familiar with the material, so it's cool to see, young kids react to the songs maybe that are hearing for the first time live. So that's always cool too.
a few minutes ago you mentioned getting older, and while obviously you're a dude that keeps yourself in shape between skateboarding and your workouts and stuff, but does like stage diving and jumping in the crowd, does that get harder these days to
Yeah,
like?
not harder, but it's the risk reward starts to change.
Yeah,
Like like I can't afford as much to like roll an ankle or like like blow out an elbow these days as I used to be able to. So, but I can't resist. I was like, I'll probably take it mellow. This is a pretty big barricade. Probably not tonight. And then like the show starts and like if the energy's there, I'm like, well, I gotta go.
yeah,
Although I will say, instead of trying to jump the gap between the barricade like I used to always do, I'll now occasionally maybe get to the barricade and then jump from the barricade into the crowd. So it's
yeah.
a little bit of old man gamesmanship there. So
Right.
still technically a stage dive, but it's more like a front roll.
Right. Yeah, I saw. I think it was just a few days ago on your Instagram. You posted doing that at the Kill Switch show in St. Louis. Was that the first
Oh
time?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Was that the
yeah,
first time in a
totally.
while,
Yeah.
like at another band show, you did that as a like as a fan, I
It'll
guess?
happen occasionally. It always, yeah, no, it'll happen occasionally. Still, it's probably more rare, but like, yeah, recently I went and saw the Cro-Mags and like had to jump on, like people's heads and sing along and like, definitely for Hatebreed when they would come through town and just, it tends to be like if I see some like either older hardcore bands that I used to see as a kid or grew up like seeing and playing with, but I probably don't have the mosh stamina that I used to have these days, but it's also the desire to not get hit is a lot bigger these days too. So,
Right.
the
Of course.
adrenaline doesn't last as long. So getting crowd killed these days isn't really something I'm looking for.
Yeah. Right on, man. Well, I'm loving the In the Gray, and I'm looking forward to the new music, and I appreciate you taking the time for me.
Indeed, man. Always good to talk to you, brother. Thanks for spreading the word as always, man. We'll definitely catch up soon. And yeah, new music. I don't know exactly when, but it's on the horizon.
There you go, Brian Fair of Shadows Fall. A massive thank you to Brian for taking some time up there to hit me up on Zoom to talk about everything that Shadows Fall currently has going on. It was cool to look back a little bit, get his thoughts on, Shadows Fall's kind of development from being, one of the young metal bands to now being, I don't know what the right word, you don't want to say the elder statesman in the genre, because there's still bands out there like Maiden and Priest and Saxon and Megadeth and whoever else. But, having been around for well over 2 decades and making a name for themselves, there's tons of metal now that is out there that has come since Shadows Fall. And like we spoke about, a lot of these guys looked at that new wave of American heavy metal scene as a big influence on themselves. So bands like Shadows Fall and Killswitch Engage, Lamb of God, Chimera, Unearth, God Forbid. Man, do I love God Forbid. I wish they would make a bigger comeback than they have. I know they've done a few shows over the past few years, but I know Doc Coyle is pretty busy with the success he's having with Bad Wolves. But all that being said, Doc Coyle has been on this podcast before, so definitely check that one out if you have not. And speaking of that, if this is your first time listening, I greatly appreciate it. There's 417 episodes previous to this you can check out, one of which being that Doc Coyle episode, and also episode 265, which featured Brian Fair on here in 2020. So we talk a bit about what he was doing during the pandemic, so it has a bit of a different feel than a normal interview. So if you want to check that one out from a few years ago. I haven't had on too many members that are, at least off the top of my head, that are involved, directly with those bands I just mentioned from the Northeast, the New England area, from that new wave of American heavy metal. I've had on a few bands from the new wave of British heavy metal, like Saxon. Biff Byford has been on this podcast before. There's been tons of guys from the thrash world. David Elfson of Megadeth's been on a couple times. Other previous members of Megadeth like Chris Broderick and who am I forgetting? James Lomenzo, one of my favorite bassists. I just mentioned Chris Broderick, and he was in a band called Act of Defiance, who features a Shadows Fall member named Mad Blanchard. I believe I've got a drum head hanging on the wall behind me, signed by all those guys. So there's another kind of Shadows Fall play-in for you. We've also got previous episodes that feature Alex Skolnick of Testament, Ted Aguilar of Death Angel, members of Toxic Holocaust, Battlecross, Trevor Sternad, rest in peace, was on this podcast from the Black Dahlia murder. Let me think of some other heavy bands throughout the years at Legion. Michael Stahn, kind of the godfather of melodic death metal from Dark Tranquillity and originally with In Flames, has been on here in the past. Glenn Hughes, one of the greatest voices of all time. I've been on here a couple times. Gene Simmons of Kiss, Vivian Campbell of Def Leppard and Dio, Dee Snider, Jeff Tate of Queensryche. Let me think. Members of more current in the rock and roll world like Shinedown, Three Doors Down, Hellstorm, Saliva, Trapped, Sevendust. I know Trapped and Saliva aren't really currently rocking up the charts, but you know what I mean. The newer era of radio rock, I guess would be the right way. And then I've also branched heavily into the 80s rock and the hair metal side because I unabashedly love that stuff just as much as I love thrash metal and bands like Shadows Fall. But members of Tesla, Warrant, Firehouse, Trickster, Slaughter, LA Guns, Whitesnake, Motley Crue. The list of that era is great and long. Phil X of Bon Jovi was just on here 2 weeks ago now. So check back all that stuff. Members of Living Color, Whitesnake, Skillet. Did I just say Leonard Skinner? If not, a couple members of them have been on. Thin Lizzy. The list, my friends, like I said, is great and long. 400 some episodes you can check out, thethunderunderground.com. Everything's right there. You can listen directly there, but you can also listen pretty much anywhere podcasts are heard, like Spotify and YouTube and Apple, SoundCloud, Mixcloud. Wherever you're listening now, follow, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Follow on all the socials. I've got tons of content out there that's separate from the podcast. Happens on almost on a daily basis, sometimes twice a day. So follow on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky. I'm also on X, but I don't even know if my posts go directly there or not. But X and Blue Sky and all that kind of stuff is out there as well. So follow on all the socials. I've got merch. It's not listed on the website right now because I'm doing a revamp on that. But if you see me or talk to me, I've got stuff laying around that I can hook you up with. Comment on anything you see. Comment, like, share. That's an easy, free way to help support this podcast. All right, once again, a massive thank you to DEB Concerts, Rocklahoma Bitches, Sunset Tattoo, and of course, Brian Fair And until next time.
Thunder Underground, y'all.